My name is Leone Baum, and everybody calls me Lee. I'm actually fourth generation American on both sides. And my kids, my grandkids are sixth generation American. I'm very proud of that. My grandfather in the late 1880s came here with his father and his older brother, and they left because of the conditions in Russia. There was tremendous, there were pogroms where Jews, they would kill the whole little shtetl or town. And there was also no money. They were peasants. When my grandfather came here, they left his mother and 5 little ones, little brothers and sisters, at home in Russia. And they brought them here eventually. It took them not that long to bring them here because by the time he married my grandmother in 1900, New Year's Eve, 1900, everybody was here. They came by ship. They walked a tremendous distance in Russia to Germany. They caught the ship from Bremen, and the ship was not able to, they were not able to leave the ship when it got to the United States because they were not allowing Jews in. They had filled their Jewish quota. So they continued on up to Canada, got off the ship there, and walked somehow the whole distance from Canada down the eastern coast. Well, they came through Schenectady and Albany and walked down to the Lower East Side, and that's where my grandfather met my grandmother. She was 16, came all by herself, also from Bremen, but she was able to get off the ship. She came in 1895, about 10 years after my grandfather came. And her older half of her family were already here. She was her father's second family. His first family, the older family, were here. The younger ones, my grandmother was the only one left after the cholera epidemic wiped out the rest of the family. So then they both became citizens and settled in the alphabet streets on the Lower East Side. There was a central court in which people did their laundry, washed their clothes, and things like that. And the bathrooms, they were cold water flats. And I don't know where the facilities were. I think they had indoor plumbing, but it was probably in the hall. And for all the apartments used one shower and one toilet, and it was not easy. And I think about how strong people are who come here in that way and manage to survive, because they come out of little farming. What it looks like is the way the South looks here now if you get off the main road and go into the little towns where you have the little houses and where people live these very rural lives. And coming from that into the city of Manhattan, it's hard to imagine how they were able to do it. And my grandparents, coming out of that background, were able to send 4 kids to college, which is amazing. And my grandfather never had a really good job. He was a tailor most of his life. But at some point, they moved to Freeport, and he had a business in Freeport, a little store, and they got there they lived there for a nice few years, and then came the crash, 1929, and they moved to Brooklyn so that so everybody in the household worked. And my poor grandmother, who was sick with emphysema at the time, got stuck with me and my sister. And that's basically the story of how I got here through adversity. My father and mother divorced very young. I barely remember living with my father. I was 7 and my sister was 4 when he left. And he moved up to Utica, and I really only saw him maybe a dozen times in my whole life after that. My mother was a I guess you'd call it a Girl Friday. And after we got to Brooklyn, she got a job with Dennison Brothers, who made children's underwear that they sold to Bonwit Teller and stores like that. And she stayed with them until they liquidated their business. And then she went to work for Mervyn S. Levine, who was a men's tailor, and she stayed with him until she could no longer work. I started school in Freeport, and I went to school in what's the administration building now, down there, from kindergarten through 2nd grade. And then we moved to Brooklyn, and I went to PS 235 until the 6th grade, and then PS 181 until the 8th grade. And then I went to Erasmus Hall High School for 4 years, and then to Pratt Institute. It was very different then. Pratt had a 3% Jewish quota. And living in Brooklyn, and where I lived, we were all Jewish. I thought the whole world was Jewish. And now here I am at Pratt, could not pledge any of the sororities. Because they didn't take Jews. And there was one sorority that did, and I joined that, pledged that and joined that. And then my girlfriends and I, we became super sensitive, and this was my next political movement. We had them open up the charter so that we took in 2 black girls. And that was a start of integration at Pratt. So, and I'm very proud of that, because I had no idea what I was doing. You know, I mean, we just kind of did what we thought was right. But there was no movement at that time. The movements hadn't started yet. It was still in the 40s, and the rumblings didn't start until the 50s. My first political encounter, I was 7 years old, and it was 1936, and Franklin Roosevelt was running for a 2nd term, maybe the 1st term. And everybody in Freeport was Republican except my family and 1 or 2 others. And this little girl next door, her parents were Republicans, and they were voting for Alf Landon. And I can remember the battle cry. It was Landon, Landon, rah, 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 stick 'em in the ash can, ha, ha, ha. And that led to a fist fight. It's the only fist fight I ever had in my whole life. I can remember rolling around on the lawn and scratching and biting and pulling hair. That's my last fist fight. But it was only the beginning of my political involvement. Although I did toy with running for office. It was very interesting. Do you ever hear of Hazel Dukes? I was going to run for the town council here in the town of Hempstead, not the village. And Hazel said, "You can't do that. We need to run an African-American candidate," and they did, and he lost. And I probably would have lost too, but I decided to take myself out, not to push it. I became active. I was chairman of the Anti-Defamation League Committee. I was already living in New Hyde Park, and I invited Lincoln Lynch and Don Schaefer. Do you recognize those names? Because Dawn came from Great Neck. And they were struggling with integration here at that time. This school in Manhasset was one of the, that's one of the results of that, or not result, it's one of the occasion, activities, events. But they were also struggling in Lakeview. Lakeview was turned over at that time. Right here, Hempstead was turned over. Roosevelt was completely white, completely turned over. And I invited Lincoln Lynch and Don Schaefer to come and speak at a meeting that we held in the temple. Our chapter of B'nai B'rith met in the temple. And I was horrified at the meeting because the people I expected everybody to feel the way I did. You know, this is a great thing, we have to get behind it. They were trying to stop the rapid turnover. And I can remember there was a real altercation, no fist fights, but got very nasty. And I can remember the president of the temple, who was just in the audience, said, "Are you threatening me, Mr. Lynch?" And Mr. Lynch, and it's the first time I heard this, so it was very meaningful. Mr. Lynch said, "No, sir, I'm promising you." And at that, I resigned from the anti-defamation. I resigned from that, from the organization, because I was so disappointed. It worked out exactly the opposite of the way I had thought it would. And that's when I began to understand the difference between the deep hostility between black and white. But unfortunately, I don't think it's gone away. In 1967, John Kearse was the director of the Five Towns Community Action Program. And he stayed in Five Towns until 1970. I was always at the central headquarters. The work he did down there is outstanding, because there was a settlement house with 7 acres of property it was in Inwood, I guess, and where the CAP was operating out of was it's hard to describe it. It was barely a building. And what he was able to do was get the board of directors of the CAP, Community Action Program, to merge with the board of directors of the settlement house, which were, I think, Italian. Definitely white, and I think they were Italian. And with that, then he went to Ralph Caso, who was at that point the town supervisor, town of Hempstead supervisor. He was not yet county executive. And they were able to strike an agreement whereby the town would build a community center on the 7 acres of land. They cleared the land because the building was very old and very dilapidated. They cleared that, and they built the Five Towns Community Center that stands as a model even to today. And the town gave this new board a 99-year lease, which they're struggling to try to keep, because without John's strength and the goodwill of Ralph Caso, you run into plain ordinary everyday folk and plain ordinary everyday politics. So holding on to that valuable program and land and all the money, and what people forget is that with that came a lot of grant money, because federal money was coming in for the Community Action Program. Head Start money comes in for Head Start. It's all in that building. senior citizen programs. And whatever they have there comes with jobs. And what's it all about? Jobs. What John Kearse wanted was empowerment of the people, and he used those words all the time. And we had a, what did we call it? We had that paper he brought to us. He brought it from 5 towns. He had developed it in 5 towns. And the last words are, the goal will be more acceptable than the methods. And what he ran into was unbelievable opposition, and I was sitting right next to him, and I saw what they did to him, what they tried to do him. John was one of the strongest people I've ever met. He was also a visionary. He always knew what we should be doing. Unfortunately, we couldn't always do it. There were tremendous opposing forces. One of the things that was a problem was what happened in Great Neck, in Manhasset. We had 2 parts of the board. We had the low-income residents, and those people invited the people with money. And in Great Neck, you have lots of people with a lot of money and a lot of influence. The trick is to keep the low-income part of the board, which was 51%, to keep them understanding that they should be in control. And they would find themselves either sweet-talked or talked down to, or whatever, and keeping the neighborhood section strong was very difficult, very difficult. A lot of pressure on people to cave, and old habits die hard. People don't think they think because they have money, they're worth more, but they're not. They're not more qualified. You get some housewife who comes in and is the great lady, and people go for the okey-doke. John was very insistent on what he wanted to have happen. But he was successful. I mean, we still have the Head Start program, and how many people have been able to join the great middle class because of John's work and his insistence on people going to school, on the youth programs, and the struggle to keep it going along the right track, because tangentially people get bored off, they get tired, people get tired. Some people don't have the right mindset. He always tried to have the affected people have the jobs. The people who needed the jobs and who understood the problem should be the ones who got the jobs and were working. And he died at his desk, literally. He took himself to the hospital and died the next day. He left his desk, took himself to the hospital. He literally spent his entire life, never moved into a big house. He drove a Lincoln. He was a big man, and he needed a big car. And he also said, the kids have to see that it's not only the drug dealers who can drive a car like this. When the anti-poverty program was first set up, Gene Nickerson was the county executive. He was the only Democratic county executive this county had ever seen since it was chartered in 1932. And he remained the only. He was a one-term county executive, and there wasn't another one till Tom Swazi. Otherwise, solid Republican all those years. What Nickerson did was give the anti-poverty money that he had the county apply for to the Health and Welfare Council, and they established the rules for the anti-poverty program. And what they did was look at the 1960 census and took the 10 communities that had the most people with less than an 8th grade education, the most overcrowded housing, and then of course the income, you know, the income stats. And they found Glen Cove, Great Neck, Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead, Long Beach, Inwood, and 3 others that I can't remember. Did I mention Great Neck? You know, anyway, that's how we found Great Neck. And the people who did the early organizing, Hazel Dukes was one of them. Jerry Johnson, if you knew Jerry, I think maybe she worked up in Great Neck for a while. And they did the local organizing, and they did one terrific job. And the way it was set up was with non-resident professionals and resident non-professionals. In 1969, the EOC was incorporated as a separate independent body. And David DeRienzis from Port Washington thought he would be the director. But the black community, including John Kearse, thought that it should have a black director because the programs were in the minority communities. Although everybody in the minority communities is not poor, that is where they put the poor. When poor people are relocated, they don't relocate them into the fancy part of Great Neck. They relocate them into, it used to be the Shore Road area where they were, you know, I don't have to tell you where they are in Great Neck, where the places are. Spinning Hill, of course, was one of the places. And all of the black leaders, even the ones who didn't speak to each other, because there was tremendous infighting. There always is. And they all got together, carried on until John got the job. And when John Kearse got the job, he was the first black administrator of any program of any size in this county. And he made it a black organization, and he worked very hard to make sure where the jobs went. And he changed the structure. He said, no more professionals. If we have professionals, they're not going to be non-resident. They're going to be resident professionals. But he didn't think we needed professionals. We needed people who had good background, good education, good intentions, and that's how he structured the board and the staff. And it was a wonderful, exciting time because he was having all of the local programs have their elections over and over until they did it right. And they had to be challenged elections. It couldn't be done easy. You find one person and you know, you say, oh, we have somebody. But he would insist that they be as close to the right people as you can ever pick, because you can never pick the right people. But you try. And so he set up this whole new structure, and he opened up the program because he was planning to fire me when he came to the commission because he couldn't figure out what we did. And I had on his desk, I had done all these research reports that Don Middleton, who was his predecessor, used to hide. He didn't want anybody to see them. They were very controversial. What I discovered in figures and reports for the first time, there may have been other people doing it, but nothing was ever released. And I think Jim Short, who became president of Hofstra, was the head of social services at that time. He released them. When John gave them to him, he put them in the newspaper. They were reports that showed that if you took the stats, infant mortality, you name it, whatever it was, not the good things. If you pulled out the stats of the 10 community action programs, this county was a different place. Because if you took out, because the stats of the anti-poverty program communities skewed the numbers so that the county did not look as good with the stats in. When you pulled those stats out, the county became this marvelous, marvelous, wealthy place. So when he found those reports, he changed his mind because, you know, I said, Don had them, never released them. So I got to stay another 40 years. Johnson signed the Economic Opportunity Act in 1964, 4th of July. And then Vietnam fell in on his head, and they never had the money to fund the anti-poverty program properly because the money was diverted into guns and, you know, and we've been at war really since then. There hasn't been a really, I don't think we've been at peace since then. So, so that was what Washington was doing. And we got, this is very interesting, our legislation sunsetted every 2 years. We had to fight to reauthorize the legislation every 2 years. That was the whole Economic Opportunity Act, including Head Start and everything else. And then Washington would try to phase out Head Start regularly. Very expensive program. And we went to Washington, 20,000 of us from all over the country, and we lobbied to keep Head Start. And John Kearse, with Clive Chilton, who was a minister from, his headquarters was in Levittown. He was one of our CAP directors. They held Donald Rumsfeld in a room because Donald Rumsfeld was head of Health and Human Services. Therefore, he was the head of the anti-poverty program. And they got him in a room, and they wouldn't let him out until he agreed to reauthorize Head Start. That was around 1970. And I forget who was president because the person who was important to us was Donald Rumsfeld. And we got the job done. So, and then we went, and we thought that when Jimmy Carter came in, being a Democrat, we thought, hooray, we've got it made. But we didn't. The only help we ever really got was from the, Ted Kennedy helped us. He was head of the, whatever committees he was always head of. And the Republicans, Senator Javits helped us. He was the Republican senator from New York. I remember meeting in his office. And I actually worked on the WIC legislation because I got a call one day from his assistant, Miss Penny Feather, whose name you can never forget. And she said, what would you think of a program? And she described the WIC program. And I said, sounds great to me. I mean, if you can help pregnant and lactating women by giving them vouchers for food and milk for their children under 5 so that you prevent the lifetime health problems that come from poor nutrition, sounded wonderful. And I actually got to go out to Washington and help work on the legislation. And it got passed. And then Nassau County said, we don't need that. We don't have any low birth weight babies. So I found a wonderful woman in the health department here, Nassau County Health Department. She was a biostatistician, and we backed into the figures by finding out how many babies actually did die before the age of 1, before the age of 5. You can find the stats. It's hard to say what from. The causes are hard, because if you die from pneumonia, that doesn't mean there wasn't an underlying reason for you having pneumonia. It's like AIDS. Very few diagnoses of dying from AIDS, because people don't die from AIDS. They die from pneumonia or from other breathing problems. So anyway, those were very exciting days, because we were building something. Nixon tried to close the program. And a letter went out to all the community action, 881 in the country, saying, close your doors, you're out of money, closing the program. By administrative fiat, he tried to close the program. And some did. And John said, no, we're not closing the program. We're going to Washington. He can't do that. There's a law in place. They have to give us the money. And whatever happened, we fought very hard, and we got the program. 1980, Ronald Reagan repealed the Economic Opportunity Act. It was the only law that he repealed in the Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981. And then we went to Washington, and we had it put into a block grant. They called it the Community Services Block Grant. They didn't just dump us into Health and Human Services. If they had done that, we would have disappeared, because we were a tiny program. And you can see, economic opportunity is one thing. Community services is not the same thing. We lost that strong stand, and we lost the fact that people they couldn't understand. You know, now we're just another service program. And John was an amazing manager. And so we did the same amount of work with less money. That's all. We just worked harder, more dedicated, devoted more time, more effort. But he didn't do any mass layoffs or anything like that. He did attrition, he did some cutting, but basically our program, it suffered, but it didn't die. Other programs died around the country, because some of the states didn't take the money. Some of the states took the money and closed the local programs and put the money into their own general fund and used it for what they called anti-poverty. John Kearse, he would have a vision, and I would make it work. My job was to make it real. It's as simple as that. It was my job to make it real. His vision was we were going to have an 18th Assembly District. We had never had minority representation in Albany, ever, since time immemorial. Never had minority representation out of Nassau County. Until 1980 census, we had been talking about it since he came on board. And I was the research director, so I had to learn what he was talking about, and I met with the Stanley Harwood, who was the head of the Nassau County Democratic Party, and he was wonderful. He gave me a lot of time, and then I talked to the woman who did the political stats, and I learned how the census tracts worked and how we figured out how you figured out how the assembly districts were carved out. And then when I took a look at the map, and it had all the census districts, and they're little teeny things on, and I got a box of Crayolas and I colored in all of the census tracts that had more than 20% or 30. I don't remember exactly what I did, but I did it, and I still have those. I have them somewhere, those little maps, and I said we have a district, the Hempstead, Roosevelt, Uniondale. We can have an assembly district. It has just about 168,000 people in it, and it's all nicely contiguous. Of course, it was cut like this before we had. What we had to do was take these 4 segments and have people willing to change the borders, because when you change the borders, you change the assemblymen. And some of them might lose their jobs and this and that. But we did it, we got it, and we got it done. And John sent me up to Albany. I worked out of Arthur Eve. He was deputy speaker. He was from Buffalo. And I worked out of his office. And we got the district. And so John had the vision, and I did all the work. He didn't do it. I did it, but I did what he told me to do. He was the one who had, a lot of people have said to me oh, but you did. No, without him, there would have been nothing for me to do. I'm not the visionary. He was the visionary. He knew what we needed, and he let me do the work. He sent me up there, and I did the hands-on, but I couldn't have done it without him. We were a really good team. I was able to take his vague, and it was more like prophecies or something. It was very real. His instructions were very real. A lot of people never understood what he was talking about. So that's how we worked together. And then when, in the 1990 census, he organized a bunch of people who became plaintiffs in the lawsuit that sued Nassau County for being an illegal government, because there was our Board of Supervisors was composed of the presiding supervisor and supervisor of the town of Hempstead. That's 2 people representing 800,000. The presiding supervisor of the town of North Hempstead, who is 1 person, representing, I think there are about 150,000 in North Hempstead, and there are 300,000 in Oyster Bay. It might be reversed. It might be 300,000 in North Hempstead, but also only the presiding supervisor. So there you have, 4 people, none of whom were elected to be supervisors. They were elected to be supervisors of their own towns, not to serve on county government. But with the being elected head of their town, they automatically went and sat at the county table. And the mayor of Glen Cove, which was Swazi, 30,000 people, and the only entity that elected someone was Long Beach. Long Beach elected someone to sit on the Board of Supervisors. And so, of course, when you have 30,000, 1 man representing 30,000, 2 people representing 800,000, it becomes a weighted, they had to weight the votes. But it's not fair, because poor little Glen Cove, can't win anything by itself. So the federal judge, Arthur Spat, declared the government unconstitutional. And he said to Tom Galata, who was the supervisor, and this is what you're going to do about it. He says, your charter, the county charter at the time, he said, has the means for you to change your government. either you do it, he said, or I'll do it. Because the lawsuit was on two grounds. One was civil rights and one was voting rights. He said, I will rule on the voting rights, but if you don't act properly, I will rule on the civil rights, and then I can do it, he said. And I was there when he said it. I can do it all by myself. So that's how that happened. And again, I took out my crayons and I said, John, we can not only get one, we can get two minority districts. And we did. I had been working for the anti-poverty program for about 5 or 6 years. And I had not been aware before then, I had not been aware of the tremendous difference in the living, in how people lived in Nassau County. And once I went to work for EOC, I traveled. I was in a different community action program every day, and I got to meet the people and I got to see the people, and I had some very sensitizing experiences. In the 5 towns, I found that there were people who were still living with dirt floors. Dirt floors. It was 1967, 68. And people in Nassau County, in the richest corner of the county, 5 towns, living with dirt floors. Before he left the 5 towns, John had gotten the urban renewal program kicked into gear, and they built lovely garden apartments there, lovely little community, and that's where most of the people were able to move into that. I also had a Christmas Day experience. The chairman of the EOC board called me and said, you're Jewish, you're not doing anything today, come with me, I have something we have to do. And what she had was a whole dinner, cooked food. I don't know where she got it. I probably knew then, but I don't now. And we went to into an apartment here in Hempstead. And a woman with a few kids was living in her apartment with nothing in it but some mattresses on the floor. The stove didn't work. We brought them their dinner for the day, and I can't stop thinking about it. Also, one of the experiences that I had with Stephanie Young, who was the chairman of the Manhasset EOC, she was on our board here in the EOC board that met in Hempstead. She was on the central board, the county EOC board, which had representatives from every community. And my job was to take her home. I took her home I would drive her up to where she lived in the apartments in Spinney Hill. And one night we were talking, of course, and I can only do one thing at a time. If I'm talking, I can't be driving. So we find ourselves in the middle of a little section, the golf club section of Garden City. And there's no reason to be in there unless you live there, because you can't get out once you get in. All of a sudden, I see the flashing red lights, and there's a police car behind us. It must have been about maybe 10 o'clock, maybe not 9:30, 10 o'clock, something like that. And Stephanie said, "Keep your mouth shut," she says to me. "Don't say anything." So I unwind my window, and the policeman says, license, registration, and what are you ladies doing in this neighborhood at this time of night? And everything, to me, you have to remember, I'm 40 years old, but everything is a huge shock, because it's like I was wrapped in a cotton wool for the first 40 years of my life. And Stephanie leans forward and she says, "Sir," she says, "we got lost. I just finished cleaning the lady's house and she's taking me home." And he let us go. He showed us how to get out, because at that point I didn't know where I was. And I had just taken a left instead of going all the way left. I had taken a half left and got myself into this community. I have suffered over that. Each time I think about it, I want to die. I'm so ashamed and I'm so embarrassed, and that I let her do that. I was so mad, because what an insult to the two of us. What an insult. And she took the whole thing, and you know, and then we laughed about it. And that's how it is.